And when you see examples of injustice being pinned against each other, then it's almost always someone who wins if both of these lose. And so when you see injustices being pinned against each other, you can almost assume that there will be propaganda stuck into either side of this thing to try to make these two groups further apart, rather than to fight side by side against the injustices that they are living through. So I've been seeing a lot of propaganda online and the patterns of propaganda online, so I thought that I would take the opportunity to create a video about how propaganda works. So here is my take on how the propaganda online works today and how the propaganda machine works, their tactics. So the first step of all propaganda is to create an alternative logic. And the tactic here is to take charge of as much digital infrastructure as possible. What I mean by that is that you need to buy domains, websites, you need to create websites, you need to create videos, you need to take charge of forums, you need to be involved in different places online where you can start seeding content that is supporting this alternative logic about facts and about reality and about situations. So it's about writing quite inaccessible. It should look like research papers. It should be 2-hour documentaries. It should be, long content that people really don't have the stamina to read, but that exists, that you can always refer to, as this piece said, that is facts-based, but it's not facts-based. It just looks as though it's fact-based. So it's spreading some kind of disinformation in a complicated enough format that you believe that it has to have something to it. There is no smoke without fire, right? So the first step is to establish a base where this alternative logic exists. The second thing is finding your targets. And the way you find your targets is by having a look at what people believe strongly in. What are they passionate about? Because when we're passionate about something, we stop thinking rationally, or to even a greater extent, we stop thinking rationally. So what they do is they look through our social profiles, our websites, our searches for us, our forum affiliations and things like that. And they go through, what are we interested in this case and in this case? Do we have the profile of being someone who can support their cause in the end? Or do we have an interest that is associated with what they're trying to achieve? So they use our passionate interests in order to sort of define who they could potentially target and go through. Then they look at how powerful we are in social media platforms. Who are we connected to? And they use something called Centrality Studies in order to see how we are connected to other people, to see how likely are we to be a powerful source to push information to other people. So that's the targeting. It's a bit complicated, but you can do it manually as well by browsing and collecting data. So this is nothing that requires any advanced technology to do. The third thing is making the approach, and this is done through two variations that I've been able to identify. One is a friend of friend approach, where they look at and try to identify people in your network that are connected to a lot of people. Then they themselves try to connect to these people because they believe, and they're right to believe, that these people are likely to accept friend requests from people that they don't know, right? They might even take a profile photo from one of their friends and put that on this profile so that they will believe that this is a real friend that they're adding. Things like that happen. So they try to approach this person. And this is done automatically through fake profiles. Then what they do, once they have made friends with enough of those people who are connected with a lot of people, is that they look for the targets within their friends lists. And when they find their targets, they approach them and try to connect, try to make friends with them. Now, as they make friends with this person, what happens is that since they might have 12 common friends, it's much higher likely that you will accept such a friend request. And so that's what they use when they use the friend of friend tactic. They approach you and connect with you by having a lot of similar friends, but those friends don't really know those people anyhow. It looks as though you have a lot of friends in common, so you're more likely to connect to them. The other way is by interest. So here, since they know what you're interested in, they create a group that is based on that interests, like animal rights, and then they wait for you to find that group. The way they do it is that they populate that group with fake profiles so that it looks at the largest and most like the best group on that topic, or they utilize some kind of trend in society to create a group first about that topic. And as you join, they interact with your content more than with other content so that you get hooked on this group, or that the algorithm thinks that this information is more relevant to you than other information. And so the purpose here is to be able to publish content that will end up in your profile. So once they've established the contact through the approach, they are good to go with the next step. And the next step is to establish isolation. This is where they use content that relates to your special interest, but it makes it a little bit more radical all the time. So it tries to radicalize you over time. It nudges you to start liking content and reading up on content that might not be true. It has some aspect of truth in it. It's some real event, but they add to the story. So the purpose of doing this is twofold. The first thing is for you to believe that there is a real truth out there, because of all the posts you start seeing in your feed now, you see that there are so many posts that must be the reality, or the majority must think these things because there's so much being posted about it. And so you are likely to believe that as facts more than you would the other opinions. So that's the first thing. They establish what they say as the truth. Now what happens as a consequence of that is that when you start talking with your friends that you had before, who have not been in this bubble, let's say, of information, is that their information, you get access to all of that information all the time, but you get mostly the access to this other information. So when they don't understand you, you're like, you guys are crazy. This is the truth. This is what's really happening. You gotta, read up on things. You gotta get on top of this. But you are in a bubble, and that bubble is enforcing your belief rather than you being critical to that belief. So within this bubble, you are discussing and debating, and everyone is, patting each other's back. But to the outside world, you seem like a freak. That starts to isolate you. So it shifts your friends from your old friends to your new friends. That step is all about isolation. And you can read up on majority illusion, for example, to have a look at how this works in theory and in practice. The fifth thing is meme generation, or creating a common secret language. Now they've got you in a group. Now you guys need to strengthen your identity by inventing memes. So memes are ways of using language that explains some kind of phenomenon with something simple. So you use common words like trigger warning, for example, something that came out of the social justice movement. That's something that's used only by them, but it strengthens them. It's trigger warning. It's something that if you say it, it means that you understand some logic that exists within that group. We saw Pepe the Frog from the conservatives, who was being used to being like, yeah, this is what this means. We got fake news that is being utilized by Trump a lot. That is a language that unifies a group of people. So the fifth step is being used in order to make you feel unity and to put you up against everyone else who doesn't understand you. So it's to further your isolation. So fifth step, meme generation, creating a common secret language in the group. The sixth step is to create anecdotal evidence, and this means that they create these scenarios that if this is true, then this must also be true. Meaning like the mathematical expression, if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A also must be greater than C. The only problem with this logic is that it's very rarely true in other circumstances. Just because like something sounds as though it's because of something, it doesn't mean that it is because of something. And so we have seen a lot of examples of this where people are using anecdotal evidence to prove a point, like this happened and then that means that this must be true. But that is not the fact. And so what they do here is that they usually utilize some kind of soft spot for everyone, like a cute animal, someone who is seen as an easy target in society, like old people or sick people or things like that we perceive as people that we need to protect. So they take that and then they put this anecdotal evidence around that thing. Like, but what about this person. I know you've seen this 1,000 times. Like, you put up an injustice online and then someone pastes a comment that says, but what about this person? This person didn't get their rights either. And so this is only possible because they have their own group belief, and they are being fed these anecdotal evidences, and they are being pushed with fake news from both sides. Now sound like Trump, I know, but this is being employed in both sides to strengthen the message, although it wasn't the actual thing that happened. So these are being pushed against each other in order to further the problems, like to push us further apart. Tactically, they're used that way. One of these might be completely correct, like in the sense of the video now. We could see that the police officer killed that man, and it was like full disclosure because everything was filmed. But then there are other pieces of content around this that cut out important bits and pieces to explain the full scenario from that side. On the other side, they're trying to say, like, but what about the justice for this person? Or these police officers are doing a good job and things like that. And they're pinning this against each other using those kind of anecdotal evidence that are story-based, that are emotionally based, but that are not fact-based. Because the fact is the full story. That's the 8-minute, 40-second clip. So that's important to know when new things and information is coming out, that you should always look for the full story. And until you have the full story, it's just, content. And sadly, it can't be trusted anymore, especially when it comes in a pattern of what about or what if, because what ifs and what abouts don't exist in a world of facts, because then we know why things happen. So the 7th step in this is a triggering event, because you need a triggering event that will bring in the attention of mass media, because up until this point, this has just existed with subgroups that are really passionate about, opposing causes. Now it's the objective of everyone to pin these groups against each other for the public eye to see, because that's how you get mass reach for these opinions. So you need some kind of sensational event that happens, as in this case of the latest week, a police officer kills someone and it's caught on camera. And then you have a real event that you can use. If that is not possible, and if you feel like the need to create chaos on a large scale, you need to create this event. So that's when you start inviting people from opposing groups to rallies, for example, right next to each other. So that will create a conflict, and then the people are there to film it and put it online. And so they're either using a situation that happens. It always happens before elections. It always happens like during other events that we shouldn't pay attention to. It has this super pattern of happening before or during other important events to bring our attention to this thing instead. And once they've done that, they start putting out their bots. That are, whenever someone is talking about this injustice, their bots are commenting, or they have affected their groups of real people to go out and comment on these things with the anecdotal evidence. But what about, right? And then media is enforcing this and making it very real for everyone by reporting the injustice. And then the guys who are in the counter group, let's say, or the people who have been manipulated into being a part of some kind of sub-movement based on alternative facts and things like that, they are triggered now because they feel like the attention is being brought to this issue, whilst it should really be their issue that is the most important, like 5G or whatever, flat earth, all those ideas that are not true. They are not true, but have a big following, right? They use these groups in order to go to battle with the real injustice, and that takes time. The objective here is to take time from the spreading of the real information around the real injustice. And this is being done both for conservative beliefs and for liberal beliefs. They are both being targeted with the same propaganda machine, and it's very likely that it's the same puppet master behind both these. And the purpose of it is to push us against each other so that we will not unite and fight together. Here's the thing, it's not about Trump or about conservatives or about Black Lives Matter it's about the existence of the propaganda machine that is fueling this, not the actual things that are happening, because there are facts in this, but they're putting content, manipulated content on top of it in order to make us feel as though we have to choose which one. And that they do by using a triggering event that naturally puts us up against each other. The media has been there, the attention is starting to dissipate. Now the activist groups are trying to make everything to claw back into the limelight so that the focus will be put on their issue. They start releasing content, and they start releasing content at a broader scale, so it's not as controlled anymore. And then the propagandists use this opportunity to inject fake versions of this. So they might create a fake screen print, which is very easy to do. You don't even have to do it in Photoshop. You can just use the coding of that website and just change the headlines and make it look as though a big newspaper said something, or something happened. One very common thing here is to use old photos to say, like, this is an example of something that happened recently. But then when you look at the history of that photo, you see that that photo was taken at a completely different event. And that's not at all about that story. And so these stories are then being injected in order to amplify and to continue the narrative of these two groups being against each other, to further fuel the rage they have against each other, and to continue pulling us apart. So this was not a very short video about propaganda, but I think that it's important that we understand these 8 steps, that these 8 things happen all the time, and that we are pretty much defenseless against them unless we take the time to think through what is actually happening. And are those things that are being published, are they true or are they untrue? Like, are there facts to support this? Let's work together, and let's not let these propagandaists govern how we run our lives and what we believe.